So hello! On this channel we talk about independent spirituality and folk magic for free spirits. My name is Aster, and in today's video it is my pleasure to tell you a little bit about Umbanda. And I'm also gonna talk about how that religious system influences my practice as a folk Brazilian witch. Just as a reminder, I am not a specialist on this subject. I'm not a high priestess or saint mother. I'm not an anthropologist, but I am born and raised in Brazil, and Umbanda has been part of my family since generations. Of course, it was inevitable that I would learn a thing or two and have influences of that magical religious format in my personal craft. By the way, this is not a closed practice. I mean, I will get into more details about that later on in the video, because there are things that anybody can do and there are things that require initiation and years of experience. Anyone can be a Catholic, right? So anyone can be Umbandista, as we say. So make sure to watch everything and to pay attention to what I'm saying. And really, I can't put into words how honored and privileged even I feel for being able to sit here and tell you about Umbanda. Before we get to Umbanda though, I think it is important for us to take a look at what folk magic is. I mean, each person will have their own particular definition of what folk magic is, but I'm gonna share a little bit of what I believe that folk magic, like what it looks like to me. In a nutshell, folk magic is the magic of the people. It is the spells and the workings that people did using what was easily available and at hand. And in that sense, things like the climate, the geography, the fauna, and the flora of a region will play a big role. Folk magic is what people resorted to and still do when things are hard, and usually it is employed to solve daily problems, like to deal with and manipulate the energies surrounding situations about work, money, safety, health, and sometimes even revenge and hexing. Did I mention love? Because love is another thing that people usually try to fix through folk magical practices. When you practice folk magic, you will connect with local spirits, with local plants, local animals, and there will be a heavy influence of the culture of a people. I would say that culture is a fundamental aspect of folk magic. If you look at the folk magical practices of each country, you will notice the different aspects are based on the culture. Another very strong aspect of folk magic is oral tradition, because back in the day people didn't really have access to sometimes even learning how to write and read, so everything was passed down orally from one generation to the next. Okay, now that we have a little bit of a basic understanding of what folk magic means and what that represents, let's take a look at what is Umbanda. So the first video of the channel, I talk exactly about Brazilian magic and like witchcraft and pagan religions. I'm gonna link it up here and also in the description in case you haven't seen it already. And as I have mentioned in that video, Brazil has had a history of cultural mixture, and that's due to how colonization happened there. There were the European Portuguese invaders who came in the 1500s, then they took African slaves, and there were also the indigenous beliefs. Those were kind of lost, pretty much. Yeah, they were lost over time thanks to genocide, unfortunately. But all of that, European Catholicism, the indigenous practices, and the African beliefs and religions, all of that mixed up together over the centuries, Umbanda came to be. There are also some other African-derived religions such as candomblé and Umbanda, but I'm not gonna get into those. Basically, there were a few African cultures that were more predominant in the slave trade and they were taken to Brazil. They were the Yoruba and the Bantu people. And they took with them the beliefs in the Orishas. You might be asking yourself how exactly their beliefs survived slavery and everything, but the indigenous people's beliefs were lost to time. Well, slaves, first of all, they were needed. So they were not being slaughtered relentlessly like it was happening to the indigenous people. That's one thing. And another thing is that thanks to syncretism with the Catholicism, the Black people were able to disguise and hide their true beliefs behind the Catholic saints. So to this day, there's still syncretism. There's like a correspondence between Catholic saints and the Orishas. I've also read in the book that to a certain extent, the African beliefs were kind of tolerated because the Africans, they came from many different places. And as long as they had differences among themselves, they would not unite. If they would have been forbidden to believe in what they wanted to believe, then maybe they would have a reason to get together against one common enemy, the white oppression of the time. Their belief systems were kind of tolerated, you know, people kind of looked the other way and left them a little bit because it served a purpose for white people to continue in power instead of being overthrown by slaves fighting together. That's a theory. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that actually happened. Umbanda today is a religion. There are temples that you can visit, and it doesn't matter if you're not Brazilian and you're not in Brazil. I'm pretty sure that if there are Brazilian immigrants where you live, there certainly is an Umbanda temple somewhere nearby. It only takes a Google search and I'm sure you're gonna find something. But how is this not a closed practice? I got this question a lot on TikTok, especially when I shared some spells, also known as simpatias. I got many people asking me if it was a closed practice, if they could do it too. The answer to is it a closed practice is yes and no. Both things at the same time. Let me explain. Everybody is free to be Catholic, right? If you want, you can start going to your local church this Sunday, right? You can start going to Mass every Sunday. You can have little statues of saints at your house. You can pray to them, you can petition them, you can work with them. Nothing stops you from doing that. Isn't that so? But that doesn't mean that you can dress up as a priest and say the Mass on Sunday morning. If you want to become a priest, there's a certain path that you must follow. And the same applies to Umbanda. Anyone is free to visit a temple, to go there as many times as they want, to connect with Orishas if so they wish, or even to connect with the entities that are part of Umbanda, because first and foremost, those entities are our ancestors, so there's nothing wrong if you want to connect with them, because they are already accompanying you anyway. But if all of a sudden you decide that you want to offer services to other people or you want to open your own temple, then it's a different story. It's not something that everybody can do because it requires initiation and experience. And also becoming a medium at a temple. I have been to a temple here in my region. I am located in Île-de-France. It is the Parisian region. I've been to a temple here. Most of the people there were Brazilians, of course, no surprise, but I had the opportunity of having a conversation with a medium of the temple. She's been a medium there for 20 years, and she was a French lady. She told me that she was visited by an Egun, as we call spirits of the dead, and then she started this journey to find out what the heck that was. She thought she was crazy, but then she heard about this Brazilian religion that dealt with spirits of the dead. She traveled to Brazil to learn about it, and she came back and joined a temple as a medium. And she's been part of the chain of mediums ever since. I thought it was so amazing. So what I'm trying to say with this little story is that any person can become interested, any person can join. It doesn't matter your background, your origins, the color of your skin. Umbanda is for everybody. You can even have other beliefs on the side and still be part of Umbanda if so you wish. There's no problem. And unless you want to become a medium of a temple or you want to open a temple yourself and provide services to the community, you don't need to be initiated in anything. Okay? What is the purpose of this religion? What's the deal? What's the thing with it? Umbanda has the purpose of providing charity to the community in the sense of spiritual guidance, spiritual aid to those people who don't necessarily have a one-on-one connection with the spiritual realm. There are the giras. Gira is the religious ceremony that is open to the public. In that ceremony, what is going to happen is that the chain of mediums and also the Saint Father, as we call it, or High Priest of the temple, they are going to receive spirits within them. They are going to become possessed by certain types of spirits. I'm gonna talk about the lines of work in a minute, but there are several different types of spirits that can come. It's not random. The mediums of the temple, they know exactly who is coming and what's going to happen. The visitors, they participate in the ritual by clapping. There is going to be music playing, like physically, not by electronic devices. There are going to be drums and people playing by hand, and everyone is singing. The visitors are clapping and singing along, and all of that raises up Ashe, which is energy. And like that, the spirits are being called to come. At a given moment, they come into the mediums, and the visitors are allowed to approach and talk to them. You tell the spirit your problem, the spirit is going to advise you, or they're going to prescribe a spell for you to perform. And all of that at no cost. It is for free. Maximum, you are going to spend a couple of bucks in a candle, and that's it. If you ever go to an Umbanda temple that charges you to enter or to go there frequently, that is not correct. Umbanda is not Netflix to have monthly subscriptions. If somebody tries to charge you for visiting, that's not how it's supposed to be. It is the mediums that are part of the temple who are supposed to sustain the temple financially, not the visitors. Now I'm gonna try to talk a little bit about the lines of work, which are the different types of spirits that you will come in contact with, not directly, but through the mediums. If you go to a gira, there are also the orishas. There's, of course, a big influence of the orishas, but it's not customary that they will manifest in the giras. It's more the entities and orishas. They are more a cult of candomblé, not Umbanda necessarily. Now the lines of work, I'm gonna take a look here just so I don't forget any. I'm not gonna get into details about each of them because I believe they deserve their own videos, as a matter of fact, because there's so much to each one of the lines. But anyway, Baiano, I couldn't really find a translation for that because Baiano is a person who is born in the state of Bahia. Bahia has as capital a city called Salvador. And back in the day, during slavery time, that was a very important spot through which slaves arrived in the country. Boiadeiros, those are cattlemen, people who took care of farms and cattle. Ere is a very specific word that does not have a meaning in Portuguese, but eres are spirits of children. Caboclos. Caboclos are spirits of indigenous people. Ciganos, which are gypsies. Pretos velhos, which are black elders. Those are the souls of elder enslaved people. They are very, very wise and they give the best advice ever. They are also very slow, like they are 100 years old. Marinheiros, those are sailors, so people who worked in the sea and in ships. Those are the lines of the right, and on the lines of the left we have Exu, Pombagira and Malandro. Exu has the same name as the Orisha, but it's a different entity. It's not the Orisha that we're talking about here. And all of these spirits that I have mentioned, all these, I don't know, classes of spirits, they are ancestors. They have lived like a couple hundred years ago. They have chosen this path to gain spiritual growth and spiritual development through helping people who are alive today. And they are very knowledgeable. They are very wise, even though like they are people. They are spirits of dead people. So they are not perfect, but they do have much more knowledge than we do. They have had human lives and they can relate to what we're going through, what we're feeling. And speaking of which, I am promising a video about Pombagira since a long time. It is going to come up, okay? It is going to come up, I promise. I promise, it is coming. Something that I have to mention real quick is that because Umbanda is an African-derived religion, this is a religion that suffers a lot of religious intolerance up to this day. People learned to consider whiter religions before considering embracing their roots. There has been a lot of repression. Brazil was like it was a colony of Portugal for a long time, for a long time. And then at the beginning of the 19th century, it became an independent country. It became the Empire of Brazil. But then when Brazil didn't have that influence from Portugal anymore, instead of embracing its own history and its own culture, the elites, the people who had power, the politicians and the rich families, they wanted to aim at other European cultures. They didn't want to, you know, listen to samba or learn how to play capoeira. Those things were, by the way, illegal for some time. If you were caught on the street playing capoeira or samba, you could go to jail, okay? But all of that historical period reflected on the culture and the beliefs throughout time up to this day. So coming back to Umbanda, right? Temples of Umbanda have been invaded by the police and destroyed, and the high priests and priestesses were assaulted and thrown in jail simply for believing what they believed in and practicing their beliefs. To this day, people are still excluded and beaten and even killed for being part of African-derived religions. I have just scratched the surface of what is Umbanda and its history. Learning about Umbanda is learning about Brazilian history and our roots and our predecessors and how things happened. But okay, how does that mixed religion influences my practice as a witch? If you take a look at the content of other creators out there, I'm pretty sure you're gonna find witches from literally everywhere, every background, every culture, and many of them have religious influences into their practices. And I am also influenced by a religious format. So everyone in my mom's family was part of an Umbanda temple in the 70s and 80s. My grandma, she was a medium. My auntie, she was a medium. My uncle, he was an Ogã. In Brazil, we call Ogã the person who plays the drums during the chanting parts. My mother was too scared of spirits to join the mediumship, but she was very present. Unfortunately though, over the decades, like I have mentioned, everyone in the family started becoming Protestant. My mother was the only person who, you know, low-key, very discreetly continued to have a spiritual practice of her own. Today I have one niece who is a medium of an Umbanda temple. Trust me, my family is very big. To only have one person who is a medium at a temple, this is such a small number. But anyway, with all that background of Umbanda being so present in the family, of course that my mother taught me many things. She taught me how to use the phases of the moon, how to use herbs for smudging, for baths. She taught me some little spells. By the way, I do have to bring some spells over here to the channel to share with the world. When I was a kid, my mom would take me to giras. I saw many of those growing up. And even on my father's side is white. They were, centuries ago, they were European immigrants. And my grandpa, my father's father, he was a healer. He was a person who would receive people at his home to give spiritual cleansings, spiritual treatments, to have entities to give consultations through him. Also my father and my half-siblings, they all have shown signs of mediumship. It's been very strong in the family. Again, unfortunately, everybody basically has decided to become Protestant, and today basically no one is practicing anything spiritual other than going to church and being a good girl and a good boy, except for me. Because being a Christian, believing in God and Jesus still is much more socially acceptable than consorting with spirits of the dead. And by the way, if you want to know more details about how I consort with spirits, then just click on the first link in the description to take a look at my Patreon page, because over there you will have access to exclusive bonus content such as some of my private spell work, divination, and much more for only 1 cup of coffee a month. Did you know about Umbanda before? I truly hope that you learned a thing or two with today's video, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and remember, practice makes perfect. So let's get witching. Bye bye.